Gamers, welcome. Today we're going to talk about the Orcs. Wizards of the Coast has removed Orcs out of the latest version of the Monster Manual. They've actually moved them over to be a species in the Player's Handbook. Orcs are probably the most iconic low-level monster that first and second level parties encounter when they're starting their adventuring careers. It's been that way since the beginning. And now, 2025, poof, Orcs are just gone. Why would Wizards of the Coast do that? Well, I've got some theories. We're going to talk about that today. Why you should even care if you're an OSR referee like me, and what I think we should do about it in our campaigns. But first, welcome to my channel. I'm John. I'm new to YouTube. I'm not new to talking about games. I love refereeing OSR and old TSR style Dungeons and Dragons. I'm currently running a few campaigns of Shadowdark, a modern game that does a good job of delivering that kind of experience. So I will work in some Shadowdark references from time to time as well. So why should we care? Listen, if you are playing 1977 Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you've had the same group all along. First, awesome. I'm jealous. I wish I were still playing with my friends from way back in the day. I actually do have a couple of my high school buddies. We reconnected a year or two ago, and now they've been regular gamers, but the rest of my group, they're all over the place. If you're a grognard, you don't care what Wizards of the Coast is doing. And that's fine. For the rest of us, chances are we've got modern players at our table. And I was thinking about the different cultural contexts we bring to Dungeons and Dragons. Like, for me, growing up in the 1970s, 1980s, classic fantasy was J.R.R. Tolkien. If you're a modern gamer, chances are your touchstones are World of Warcraft and Skyrim. 5th edition, at the height of its popularity, it brought in a ton of new players. And that's fantastic. It's fantastic for every part of the hobby. It's fantastic for the OSR. A lot of 5e players, after a while, they want to branch out, explore other versions of D&D, and they come over and check out older editions. In fact, Shadowdark, I feel like Shadowdark was really targeted at 5e players. That was the initial audience for it. And so I see a lot of people who are playing with Shadowdark. This is their first experience with an OSR game after 5e. So I do think it's really valuable understanding what kind of expectations those players bring to the game. And when I look at these changes Wizards of the Coast is making with orcs and other kinds of humanoids, it feels just an evolution of gamer culture. Like, maybe it started with Blood Bowl in the 1980s, Warhammer, fantasy roleplay. How gamers perceived orcs started to change. You had the Warcraft computer game followed by World of Warcraft MMO. Who hasn't wandered the hills and fields of Tamriel and heard someone call out, "What's a milk drinker like you doing out here?" Yeah, that's right. Orcs were everywhere in Skyrim, and they weren't monsters. They were people. I put a meme together. You've probably seen this one. The Ice Age wolf who sees the humans' campfire and is, what could go wrong? All right, here's my version for what we've done to the orcs. It's terrible. We've taken monsters and turned them into big, hunky, shirtless, green Khal Dragos or She-Hulk in a bikini with elf ears. When I look at Wizards of the Coast, they really are just a company out to make money. And that's not a bad thing. That's why they exist. They are delivering products that are meeting a consumer need. They need to sense and respond what consumer expectations and preferences are and try to create a product that they think people will buy. People are throwing rocks at Wizards of the Coast as if they instigated this change, when I would submit it's us, it's gamer culture. We've created plush Cthulhu and stuffed beholders and hunky orcs. In fact, I was just listening to another YouTuber. I love the guy's channel, Bob the World Builder, right? He's super kind, positive. He's got a great attitude. And he's talking about these changes, kind of moaning about Wizards of the Coast. And in the exact same video then goes on to talk about how much he loves his orc barbarian player character, who he plays in campaign after campaign after campaign, and is now commissioning like some hunky beefcake art for his player character. Guys, I've found the problem, and it's all of us. So what can we do about this? We can't really put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point. There's two opposing viewpoints. Players and referees alike both want humanoids to still be able to be monsters. On the other hand, we've also said we want them to have free will, to have any kind of alignment, to be free of bioessentialism. In short, that means the rules aren't going to say, well, an orc is born stupid, so it can't have an intelligence over 12 or something like that. Yeah, it's gross anyway. So we want our humanoid races to be able to play in both areas, to be open for players to be a monster if they want, but we still want them to be monstrous and show up in our dungeons and adventures. And people aren't exactly happy with how Wizards handled it in the monster manual. I've been thinking about how I'd tackle this one. It's something like this. Your players are out battling the orcs, not because they're orcs, because they're part of a war band or a raiding party that is pillaging the loosely defended frontier villages of Feryandi. Your party is opposed to the orcs, not because they're orcs, because they've joined the armies of Sauron, who seeks to cover the free peoples of Middle-earth in a second darkness. Essentially, monsters are not monsters because of what they are, because of what they do. And maybe this is obvious, but it does require us as referees to take an extra step and just think a little bit harder about the monster's role in the adventure. What's the ideology, the culture, religion, leadership? What's driving the monster to be a villain? It's almost an existential existence precedes essence. Your acts are what determine whether you're a monster or villain, not necessarily your biology. It's just that simple, or just that hard. Now, as for the aesthetics of modern orcs, this is where me and maybe the preferences of modern gamers part ways. My campaign settings are not going to have Khal Drogo with green body paint as the orc, or like orc babes in bikinis. That's really just not the vibe that I want in my campaigns. And granted, this is a me problem. It might not be a you problem. There might be campaign settings or worlds where those attractive green-skinned orcs work just fine. For me, I want my inspiration to be more like Saruman, where I gotta remember the quote. Do you know where the orcs first came from? They were elves once, taken by the dark powers, tortured and mutilated, a terrible and ruined form of life. Yeah, that's awesome. That is a monster origin. That's the kind of thing you can build into your campaign. I don't know where these green-skinned hunky orcs are coming from. All right. Besides keeping our monsters monstrous, the other thing I think I'd recommend, and this is more of an old school mindset, when starting out a campaign, I don't make these exotic races, species, or ancestries available for choices for players. I think that's the kind of thing that has to get discovered or unlocked through play. I'll give you an example. A popular old school setting would be like the world of Greyhawk. The village of Hamlet, it's an iconic starting point in Greyhawk. It's this village near the Viscounty of Verbank. It's farmers basically out there not far from the Borderlands area, you would never have a party of like two goblins, a kobold, and an orc walk into the tavern for a drink. That's just not part of the context or the expectations of that setting. I could imagine a situation where the party helps overthrow the tyranny of the Goblin King. The nearby settlements establish peaceful relations with the goblins. Maybe humans are invited to visit the goblin market and vice versa. And now suddenly there's a reason to say, you know what? I think I might want to have a goblin PC. Like that feels like more of an old school way of introducing these kind of unusual options through play rather than, backstory. Yeah, the other thing about our old school games, there's tons of opportunities during encounters, whether it's a reaction roll or maybe a morale check, right? The party runs into a group of orcs, they quickly bloody them, the orcs fail a morale check, they're all looking for the exit, but there's that one guy who drops his weapons, throws his hands up and says, hey man, I just joined for 401k and the chance for some treasure. I'd be willing to join you guys. And suddenly, boom, you've got an opportunity for an orc player character. But it's something that came up through play organically, not necessarily officially part of the campaign setting. I've got one more thing to cover. Before I get there, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Let me know how I'm doing. It's a much different medium, video. We were just talking about Greyhawk, and it reminded me of a story. Village of Hamlet actually is not that far from the Temple of Elemental Evil, which is one of the iconic large dungeons in the World of Greyhawk setting. And in the module, they go through some history. It was part of Gary Gygax's home campaign. And so the author regales some stories from Gary's campaign. And one of them was this high-level fighter, Lord Robilar, played by Rob Kuntz, who would fly around Greyhawk on a magic carpet with his orc henchman, Quidge. Now, in older editions like Advanced D&D, it was really common for a player to have a couple different characters, like a stable of characters. You'd have a main character, your main character could have some henchmen or some retainers, and depending what was going on in the adventure or the campaign, you may be playing one guy or another, or be bringing your henchmen along. It was quite a bit different than modern D&D in that regard. But the thing that struck me about this particular anecdote, right, is that even in the 1970s, players had that desire to want to have monsters kind of cross over from the monster manual and get a chance to be player characters. So I know I've been a little critical of gamer culture here, but we do come by it naturally. That instinct to have orcs as player characters apparently goes back all the way to the 1970s. Hope you found this helpful. I think the three things would be: define your villains based on what they do, not by what they are. Feel free to just say no to modern aesthetics. Keep your monsters monstrous, orcs, a terrible and ruined form of life. And yeah, I don't like too many weird things in the game right from the beginning. I like to keep the fantasy settings a little bit more classic, and I think I would introduce unusual species or ancestries through play. And that particularly is really topical for Shadowdark, which has a goblin ancestry right in the core book, and I've seen a kobold ancestry kicking around the Discord. I'm sure there's more to come as well. Anyway, thank you, and see you all next time. Bye.